you've never worked with a guest before and you've been riding solo along the podcast frontier all these years, well, maybe you should consider a change. Here are the best ways to easily find guests for your podcast and how MatchMaker FM might well be able to help with that.
Are you looking for a podcast or radio show to appear on? Are you struggling to find a guest for your podcast or radio show? Let me introduce you to MatchMaker.fm. Simply create a profile, narrow your niche, and use the inbuilt messenger to contact potential partners. And the best part, it's free to sign up. So, let's find your match.
There's plenty of benefits to inviting a guest onto your podcast. See, guests bring their own perspectives, their own anecdotes, their own stories, their own expertise to the table. And contrasted with your expertise, your perspective, your opinions, well, it makes for genuinely interesting listening. You're more likely to get balanced opinions on things. Plus, don't forget that collaborating with guests can expand your network exponentially, and that's never a bad thing. When you collaborate with someone, you also reach their audiences as well, and then their audience might share it with their audience, and then their audience might share it with yada yada. You see what I'm going with. So if we've not convinced you by now, come on, shake things up. Why not invite a guest to your next podcast episode? Keep things fresh and exciting for your loyal audience. But wait, now we've got you on board, we've not even provided you with the know-how on how to recruit said guests. I mean, where does one even find a podcast guest? It's not like they grow on trees. Well, unless you want an apple as your guest. Although Isaac Newton's apple might be quite an interesting guest, particularly on a science podcast. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Let's get back into it. Reach out to individuals in your industry who you admire. Just as it says on the tin, reach out to somebody that you admire and think would be a good fit for your podcast. I know it can be scary, but just do it. Nobody ever got anything in life by not doing anything. The worst that can happen is that they'll politely decline, in which case you move on, you ask somebody else. It's not the end of the world. So reach out to them over email, social media, whatever the medium, and make sure you're communicating who you are and why you'd like them as a guest. Basically, explain to them why you think they'd be a great fit for your podcast. And don't forget to make it enticing. Make it clear as to why your podcast is worth them taking the time out of their schedules to appear on. Incentivize it if you have the means to, but try not to message somebody too much if they haven't replied. We don't want to alienate any potential guests, and you also don't want them to tell other guests, don't work with this podcast, they're a little bit pushy. You want to keep a good podcasty reputation. And hey, if their appearance on your podcast goes well, then they might just share it with their industry friends. And after all, industry friends are always looking to be on podcasts. So really, you're opening yourself up to endless potential podcast guests. Search for potential guests on social media. So on that previous note of networking, which by the way is paramount in podcast success, we're going to talk a little bit about social media. You can absolutely utilize social media platforms like LinkedIn or X, to search for individuals to be on your podcast. You can even search hashtags or phrases of people looking to be on podcasts as guests. You can even join industry-specific groups or forums to connect with potential guests. Within those groups as well, you will find industry experts, so you'll have a myriad of different people to choose from, be it an expert in the field or just a novice who's curious. Either way, it could make for interesting content. Honestly, you'd be surprised at the amount of people out there who have posted call-outs to be on podcasts as guests. Even check the ones you wouldn't think of, like TikTok. There are plenty of experts in all sorts of genres and fields who are dying to get on a podcast and have a chat with you. So reply to those tweets, send those inbox messages. Again, it's not pestering, it's just making smart moves, baby. Leverage your existing network. You know one who wants to be a millionaire? Phone a friend? Well, this is kind of like that. Ask friends, colleagues or connections whether they know anybody who might be a good guest on your podcast. Your existing network may well be a gold mine of recommendations and referrals to potential podcast guests. And actually look within your network for podcast guests as well. Depending on the context of your podcast, of course, your pals might make great potential podcast guests. You'll already have the natural comfort and chemistry of your friendship to keep it entertaining. And after all, a lot of people do listen to podcasts for that aforementioned camaraderie. So, if your podcast is mainly a talk show format, then this is basically perfect. If your pod is on a specialist subject though, well, worry not. Your friend could act as a guinea pig. Your friend could ask FAQs about a topic, and you could answer them in an educational and entertaining way. That type of approach might attract listeners who know nothing about the topic and might be alienated by thinking, oh, this topic's a bit too much for me, a bit too clever for me. Attend conferences, events, or webinars. Here at MatchMaker FM and, well, within all the companies under the great umbrella of broadcast.co, we are no stranger to conferences. We go to a lot of these things. Why? Well, they're a great place to make industry connections. You'll also find yourself learning some great skills for your pod, and in general just meet some like-minded individuals who in future could help you with your podcast, vice versa. So participate in those industry conferences, get involved in those webinars, those seminars, whatever it might be, get yourself down there. They're a really valuable tool in networking and just meeting people in person. And some of these conferences are indeed free, so just turn up armed with a lot of questions and some paper to take some notes. Job's a good one. Oh, and also don't forget your social skills. We need to be brave. We know it's difficult. We know firsthand it's difficult, but be brave. And these platforms offer excellent opportunities to get involved with some thought leaders and experts in the industry. And it is a great idea to recruit as many experts as possible onto your podcast just to really give it that legitimacy. And again, there will be plenty of people there who are armed and ready to feature on a podcast. You just got to get out there and find them. Create a guest submission form on your website. So this one is dependent on where you've primarily hosted your podcast on. However, most podcasts will have their own separate dedicated website. So we're referring to putting this on there. Make it easy for potential guests to express their interest in appearing in your podcast by adding a little submission form. Not only does it take 2 seconds to actually set up in CSS, it takes 2 seconds for a potential guest to fill out. It's an easy way to make your podcast as accessible as possible to as many people. Some people might not have your contact details. You might not want everybody to have your contact details. Well, this is perfect. And on your site, make sure you're doing exactly what you're doing with your podcast description and your show notes. Provide a clear outline of your podcast focus and demographic. It's really valuable to have a clear mission statement. This will help you to attract relevant guests and perturb any guests who might not gel that well with your content or your content's ethos. So reach out to PR agencies or publicists. Now, this one is dependent on the size and budget of your podcast, but if you have the means to do so, then you absolutely should, because it's a really good idea. PR agencies and publicists often obviously have connections with endless people within your industry, as well as influencers who might just be in the sort of same genre or realm as your podcast. Now, said publicists and PR agencies will be keen to book their clients onto anything that may interest them. Maybe it's a podcast. So why not reach out to PR agencies and publicists and see if there's anybody who would like to guest on your podcast. You don't even need to approach it like that. Perhaps you could even just express your interest in connecting with people within the industry. That way you've got a list of names in your arsenal for future podcast guesting use. Now, if you are taking this route, remember to maintain quite a serious business tone, as after all, this route is kind of like a business deal, and also be prepared that, well, these sorts of clients don't often come free, let alone come cheap. But if your podcast has grown substantially, and if you're happy with the way things are going, if you have the financial means, then absolutely go ahead with this option. It's a surefire way to get a good podcast guest, particularly a big name of interest. Let MatchMaker.fm help you. Okay, our last tip is arguably our sagest advice yet. But why? Well, we're free and we have a vast database of over 70,000 podcasts and podcast guests ready to collaborate and link with you. And also, hello, we're a site specifically designed to help you find a podcast guest as quick and as easily as possible. That's our whole thing. If you want to find the best matches for collaborations based on specific criteria, well, we can help with that. The profiles that you create are detailed and they fully flaunt your expertise, your experience, and your intentions. Plus, the platform's messaging service is super handy. It offers seamless communication to discuss collaborations, schedule interviews, and stay in touch with potential podcasters or guests. There's also the search and filter options. Search and filter options make it easy to find relevant podcasts or guests based on niche, expertise, location, and availability. Plus, there's plenty of notices and reminders for collaboration opportunities, interviews. The world's your oyster. They don't call us Matchmaker for nothing. You'll almost definitely find the podcast guest of your dreams. So why not try it? So, we feel like we've given you a pretty comprehensive guide on where to find the best podcast guests. What do you think? Have you tried a different method that's worked that we didn't include in here? Comment below. Offer up some tips. Scold us. Or do you even want to just write about a great experience you've had through MatchMaker.fm? If you'd like to chat about your connections, whack it in the comments below. Let's start the conversation. As always, thanks for watching. Happy podcasting. And good luck finding the podcast guest of your dreams.